early chapters. We'll see how the discussion goes tonight, but I'm thinking we'll probably continue just reading. We'll just do chapter 3 next week, and then the week after I'll send this out in email. We'll combine 4 and 5, and then the week after that we'll combine 6 and 7, and then I think we are also on the 12th. I've scheduled, instead of the book study, we'll do a liturgy. The feast day for St. Jacob Palmatura is the 13th of October. The 12th is a Wednesday night, so we'll just do a liturgy that night because we have a beautiful relic of St. Jacob Palmatura, and if we have his relic, we should certainly be celebrating this feast day. So on the 12th, we'll take a break from our book study. If I don't have your email address, please give it to me, and I'll communicate information out that way about kind of what we're doing and what chapters we'll be reading and all that. Any questions? Okay. So, what were your impressions of chapter 2?
It's starting to find out the early culprits.
What do you mean by
That
that?
Christianity is the reason
Oh, yeah.
why you lost the meaning of sacrifice.
Yeah.
That was surprising.
Yeah, and especially kind of the modern in the West, it was a lot of the nuance was lost because both the Protestant churches and the Roman Catholic Church, yeah, I mean they sort of almost hijack. I'm not trying to sound overly negative about them or overly critical, but they were both kind of coming from that same starting point that the sort of ugliness, the gruesomeness of the death was the starting point in terms of sacrifice. I thought that was interesting.
Most of us were raised in either Protestant or in the Catholic Church.
Okay. What else? Any other impressions from chapter 2?
I think the connection to eating blew me away.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That flipped the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, it really puts into context why food sacrifice to idols was such a big deal.
Right.
Because, they didn't have a supermarket, but if you go to the market and you're buying meat, that connection, more or less says, okay, that's all they've got if they actually want to eat meat. And then other foods too, yeah, not just meat.
Honestly, it never occurred to me that they weren't, when Paul talks about that, I just always thought it was well, why are they seeking out meat sacrifice to idols? And it was
Right,
on purpose.
was it cheaper?
Right.
Free?
So the idea that, yeah, pretty much
Okay.
the butchering that we still do,
Yeah,
they just added a religious significance to it,
Yeah.
but we butcher cows too. And suddenly, we don't call that overly violent unless we have
Well,
an
and
issue.
that- what's interesting about that is we actually don't see it.
Oh, yeah,
Most
for
of
sure,
us
right.
don't see it anymore. So when we were agrarian, then it was
Mhm.
more natural to be raised where you're seeing that kind of thing. But
Right.
now it's I think it's interesting how some people will be surprised when they look at what?
Right.
You mean they actually have to do this and this? to
No, for
convert?
sure.
It's I don't know. It's
But
so gross.
I was thinking that when I was in Mammoth recently and we caught some fish, well, you're really,
That's
my
true.
daughters are watching, doing stuff, and I thought, all I did was just sanctify it by not offering it as a sacrifice to God first,
Exactly,
It's so strange, I just secularized the whole thing, which suddenly seems odd.
yeah. This is a total aside, but I've always thought, if you eat meat, you should maybe have to start to finish butcher one animal. Like, even if it's just a bird, I don't have a real big dog in the meat versus no meat fight, but like, it's good to know where your food comes from. Anyway, sorry. Sorry for the diversion.
That was very nice of you.
All right, so, well, this, I guess we've kind of already been talking about the first discussion question, but I'll read it out anyway. In reading this chapter, what surprised me most about the ancient practice of ritual sacrifice? And I mean, for me, it was the food connection. I mean, and not just that they consumed the sacrifice, like, but all food, or much food, maybe.
Well, and he was making that point that violence was not the main emphasis.
Yes.
And then suddenly, and I thought, okay, so it wasn't, but then when you made the food connection, I went, well, of course that's not, because that's not the main emphasis for us when we go to McDonald's.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that made sense, yeah.
What is going on? But yeah, I think it also makes sense too, I don't remember exactly how he said it, because it's been a while now since I finished chapter 2, but about that you're giving you're offering the food to God, or if you're a pagan, to gods or whatever, as an appreciation, a thankfulness, I guess. Like I said, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but, so it's,
There was a phrase sharing, it was either food for the gods or food to be shared with the gods and the worship.
yeah, something like that.
We
But I
said
think it's
food
maybe-
for gods and men, from food for men and God.
Yeah,
It was a- Sacrifice was a way for providing food for men and God.
yeah,
That's deep.
and it just, I know we're talking about meat, but for me, I was remembering my trip to Japan when I was in high school, and how fascinated I was that they, before the statue of Buddha, they had all this fruit and vegetables they laid out in front, and I mean, I confess I was being a little bit high school cynical of them, because we got to pay, you pay a certain number of yen and you get to go inside the Buddha and go all the way up into the head. And then when you look out the eyes, you see the fruit that's down there, and we're like, how weird, it's like, I'm in here. So, but anyway, I digress, sorry. But I mean, those are just thoughts that just popped in my head when I was reading, chapter 2. So.
Like, one of the notes I wrote in my margin, it was like, just in one of the sections he was talking about, pagan sacrifice and just all the different sacrificial systems. And my notes are a little hazy, but just this idea that, like, all right, so pagan worship was equated to sacrifice. Like that was always a part of pagan worship. And so worship equals sacrifice on some level. And so I think one of the things that this book is trying to expand upon is, like we talked about last week, lines from the liturgy that we hear in the liturgy where sacrifice is placed in a different context. And especially the one that I've always found a little baffling is, a mercy of peace is sacrifice of praise. And it's and when we equate sacrifice with violence or losing something or always having kind of that negative connotation, even if there's something noble with it, that line just never really made sense to me. And so in terms of, I think this chapter really helped me place the idea of sacrifice alongside of the idea of actual worship.
Well, I'm not sure that we actually understand what it what worship means either. And that's part of the problem.
Nailed it. Would you like to expand on that?
When we're asked, you're asked, I don't know, if you're visiting like a Buddhist temple or something, and you bow before it, we don't realize that that's worship.
Yeah,
I don't think, we don't, because as Americans, we brought up, most of us have been brought up in a culture that doesn't use our whole body to do anything, that everything is disjointed and separate. And so,
And all of our faith is in our head.
yeah, everything is about how you think about it. Well, you doing a yoga move in your exercise is not bowing. I have an issue, I have a big issue with yoga, but, every time they say do a down dog, and I'm like, what does that mean? And no, I'm not doing that. It's that kind of thing. It's like, well, and I've asked different people, does that mean worship to those, Hindu gods? Because that's what that's based on.
Yeah.
Like, well, it depends upon your intent. And I'm like, really?
yeah, but
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of martyrs that died because they wouldn't just bow down, just do the physical bowing without
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah,
And it's like, I don't think that's right. I don't know what where that line is.
Yeah.
I have something to say. I rejected Christianity probably around 18 or 19. And then I started reading the Upanishads and Buddha, and I joined Transcendental Meditation because I wanted to control my brain. And so when I went there, they said, let me see this right, a flower, a piece of fruit, and a handkerchief. I go, why had to bring that? And it's supposed to be, the modern science of reaching down into your subconscious and relaxing. So there was an altar there, and it had a picture of this guy named Guru Dev. And so the guy started repeating all this Hindi stuff, and all he goes, do you have your flower? Well, yeah, here. Start saying some more stuff. Do you have your handkerchief? Yeah, okay, here's your handkerchief. Well, that was a sacrifice to the guru.
yeah,
But they don't tell you that. They actually lie to you and saying that you're just going through an initiation service. But actually, you're turning yourself over to that guru who serves certain gods, and so you are sacrificing things, and so it's a lie.
yeah. Well, and then kind of framing in terms of our discussion a little bit last week, in terms of sort of this Western idea that you fleshed out a little bit, that sacrifice equals violence, I found it particularly interesting that he says during the Roman persecution of Christians, authorities demanded offerings of incense and wine, not animal sacrifice, as demonstrations of loyalty to the state religion, and offering the, kind of like what you're saying, like that's a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very much in vein with what Cindy was saying, the martyrs died not doing. I mean, we have this idea that I don't want to, harp too much on it, but like we have this idea that, well, certain things are meaningless because meaning is only up here, and actions are meaningless because here's where meaning lives in my mind.
I don't know if that's, I'm not so sure.
I'm certainly not convinced either.
Well, and what you're getting at is actually on both sides. The people, those of us who came from Protestant backgrounds, the people that militate against crossings, doing batons, venerating icons, whatever. I mean, it's like, oh, that stuff, it's like denigrating, irresponsible, that just a hand-waving dismissal, right? But they can live with their girlfriend and cheat on their taxes
And
and,
do yoga.
road rage, and that's fine too, because I got my faith right. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, we are so far.
And even with the idea of crossing ourselves, it's, there's like, well, if you do it mindlessly, then it doesn't do you any benefit. And I'm like, are you sure about that? I'm not so sure. Because, yeah, somebody who is lagging in faith, which is most of us.
Yeah.
We do it to strengthen ourselves.
As a cry.
And you teach your children
Yeah.
who don't do it with intent. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't remember the source, I don't remember which elder said it, which means it's probably been a lot, but it's like, you wake up in the middle of the night feeling oppressed or demonically attacked or scared, make the sign of the cross 3 times. It's not how to say the Jesus prayer 100 times. It's not pray the Our Father. It's make the sign of the cross. It's a physical prayer.
It's kind of hard if you have sleep paralysis.
Actually, so have you read the book of? Oh gosh, what the priest that was put in the gulag, Father Arseni?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He, so when he was working, he had to work, and he could not make the sign of the cross with his hands, and so he would make it with his eyes. So he would just look up, down, right, and left with his eyes. So if you can move your eyes, you can make the sign of the cross.
But I think, in our Western mindset, or Western philosophy, and you would know this more than, we've separated the mind and the body. So that they're not connected, and it's like, just because you say it doesn't make it true.
Yeah.
I'm staring in your direction because I'm trying not to talk too much, but I think you kind of blew my mind. I hadn't thought this hard about this, so I'll carry this with me for long. I was thinking about the opposite gestures, as though they don't matter, but everybody knows they matter. If you flip somebody off, you didn't say a word, but
You're right.
But you cursed him.
absolutely,
Yes.
you cursed them.
Yes.
And that's probably what proceeds from the heart of man as much as a verbal word does. And so if what proceeds from the heart of man is a desperate crossing of oneself in the face of temptation or whatever, yeah, that's amazing.
So, I was just wondering,
Thanks for
where's
bringing
the line or maybe the intersection, between, say, like what we're talking about, being careful that we're not offering incense to idols, right? Like the Romans were, trying to force upon the Christians, versus the idea that Paul sort of put forth with this, meat sacrifice to idols. Like, what, if your conscience, like for conscience sake, if you're able to receive it, so, okay, like, thank the Lord. I think he says, something to the effect that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Give thanks to the Lord. Now, if the person tries to put it, it says like, oh, I offered this to idols, okay, turn it down. But if you don't know, and this person's not like putting it out there, just like give thanks to the Lord, because we know that idols are nothing. I don't know, how does that play into this idea that we're talking about? Or where's the intersection of that versus things that we really ought to avoid for like you said, for conscience sake.
Could you say that was more passive, like if you're kind of offering that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to answer too hastily, but I mean, I like that idea. It's. I'd love to be able to think of like an image where that might. But yeah, I kind of like the idea, and maybe we can talk this out a little bit one way. There's a passivity, right? Where, all right, if you're in Corinth in the year 38 AD, the first century, as the discussion was earlier before we came in, or as we were gathering, so if you're in Corinth and your only option is food sacrificed by idols, and you're not taking part in whatever revelry is going on, but the butcher selling meat that was inevitably, that was sacrificed and offered up at the temple, up on the hill, the pagan temple. It's like, that's one thing. You're buying meat. But I would say, maybe taking part in the festival would be where the line was drawn, and then eating meat as a part of the festival. Like, does that make sense?
I think this is where, praying for food comes into practice, it's like you counter, counter, that's.
I thought that was where the tradition of Koliva came from, was the Christians couldn't eat the meat for a while, so they just ate boiled wheat.
The emperor made it a point that everything that could be bought in the market was
I don't know what year.
sprinkled with idolatrous blood.
Yeah.
And Theodore came up with the answer that, the meat that you got in your granary, boil it, eat it, go eat it. But that was a way of avoiding it. And I do wonder about things like the new idolatries of our day. Different businesses that say we give to the latest, fad of anti-Christian philosophy, and it's come to our fast food, Burger Hut. I don't know, if there's anti-Christian sacrifice happening, like Disney's in trouble right now, right? Little Demon, it's a movie that they're coming out with where it's this Antichrist child born and you're supposed to celebrate it. It's all tongue-in-cheek and super funny. And they're trying to decide to queer everything they can in every kid's movie, and they're kind of there. They're kind of already over the line where they say, we're gonna sacrifice everything we can to a lot of things that Christians call unholy, but we know better. This is all good, this is all good. Like, is it? I mean, are we at a point now where a conscientious Christian needs to go, you know what? I'm going nuts.
Yeah.
Or entertainment, and I was gonna say like that, just entertainment in general, like, right, we have that come, we don't really believe it, but like, obviously they're offering to something like very
If it's explicit,
Christian in a lot of ways, like, how many movies are like, some sort of like demonic aspect, and I just watch it because it's fun, it's scary, like, could you say you're, since like opening yourself there and offering?
See, and, I mean, I like that, I think this is an interesting idea, like, cause let's say you bank at Bank of America.
exactly.
And
That is known as Bank of Satan.
That's, we don't think it's.
That's not a joke.
wait, what?
America has been so evil in some of their practices, they call it Bank of Satan.
Oh, okay, okay, then that's a bad example. What's a benign institution? Let's say you bank at Wells Fargo, are they more benign?
No.
Okay, let's say you
The bank of our Lord Jesus Christ.
let's say it's the Pomona Credit Union, and you'll find out, they made a donation to, the Communist Party of California. I'm trying not to,
That's safe.
yeah, I mean, we're not, okay, like,
Atheists Anonymous.
right, the anti-religious Communist Party of California. And it's kind of like, I don't know, well, I don't want to go to Bank of Satan. And Wells Fargo's apparently not any better. I just learned that. I got a bank somewhere. And you know what, there is a sense where you can say, all right, well, this is meat sacrificed to idols. I don't know if I can avoid everything. I'm just going to have to live in this world, much like first century Christians had to do, and say, well, I have to eat. And it's almost impossible to find food that's not sacrificed to idols. Therefore, I'm going to need to eat it, and
Bless it.
bless it and eat it, and pray for my city, my culture. But then there are also there are lines. Like I think where you just. There are probably lines where you just say, okay, I've got to stop being a patron of this institution, and so I mean, I guess the answer is discernment. I mean, I think that's at the end of the day. I think the answer has just got to be discernment, prayer.
I have another thought, how, because that does, I think it was the second chapter, of course, I'm reading ahead, so it might be the third, I hope not. But anyway, it said something about how Christianity had a different sacrifice, that the sacrifice now is Christ on the cross and then his resurrection.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, and then the culture became Christian, so we lost the idea of what sacrifice is. But here now, our culture is changing back, and it's inheriting all in the past. And it's called the New Age, when actually it's the old age just regenerated.
You're in chapter 3 now.
Yeah, but like I said, when you go to something and they're sacrificing something, you don't understand what it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's actually come full circle.
Not in chapter 2.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's
not
only
in
from
chapter
half
2.
circle in chapter 2.
Well, let's ask throw out the next discussion question. What explanation of sacrifice have you heard before reading this book? I feel like that was pretty well covered. We covered that last week.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about that one.
Actually, I heard,
Oh.
Dr. Bueller, whom we love.
He's a hack.
I love
Hack.
him. I love him.
What did you say?
No, he posted something on Facebook, and it was just one of those.
It was interesting. I heard that.
Yeah, he just like threw it out there, and it's like, you know, we can only sacrifice so much. You have a limited amount. I'll sacrifice for my family, work, and church. He went down those lists, but at a certain point, there's nothing more to sacrifice. You have to prioritize. Sacrifice has its limits, so choose your priorities. I'm like, that's a different twist on sacrifice. I need a sacrifice budget. Okay. For those who get overcommitted. But I thought that was worthwhile. It wasn't all negative either. It
No.
wasn't.
I need to message him, invite him to come to book club.
It's another thing I was yes.
That's right, they do.
Can I go back
Yeah.
to the first question?
Of course.
So, even the way it's phrased, the practice of ritual sacrifice, like that, the combination of those two words, ritual sacrifice, is almost repulsive. There's something, it's almost like ritual killing.
Yeah.
I think so sacrifice just has a meaning in the way we use it all. Didn't he say at the beginning here somewhere, he wasn't even sure that was the best word. I'm trying to think if he was picking a different word, whether it was offering or.
Yeah, it's like gift.
Yeah.
In chapter 2, he
Yeah, in
mentions
chapter
the
2,
Hebrew
he
word
gives like
means
3
gift.
Yeah.
words.
Yeah,
for it.
so sacrifice is so fraught with certain kind of meaning.
Well, nowadays, yeah.
But that's what I'm just saying. We are now, and we're talking about it.
Yeah, but I think throughout this book, my impression, he's trying to unpack it. He's
So,
Yeah.
but he doesn't,
he's not there yet.
the title of the book is Welcoming Gifts. That's right?
Right.
And so if you just did that, you're like, you had no idea, I had no idea that this is what we were gonna be talking about when I saw the title of the book, and we didn't give the little
Yeah.
subtitle. I wonder what, so, anyway, I think it's hard just to use the word and to disassociate it with all those associations that we've grown up with, learned, whatever. It's just because it's in media, in movies, in every experience, what do we think of sacrifice?
Well, my mind just, especially ritual sacrifice put together, my mind just goes to the Mayans.
Yeah,
I think Mayan temples, I like, what's the,
Yeah, the
Mel
heart
Gibson
sitting in the
movie.
stone guy.
Yeah,
where, Apocalypto, yeah, where I wanna say I have this image of like ritual sacrifice, having the top of Mayan pyramid and the head just like rolling down all the way to the bottom. That's what I,
That's what.
yeah.
That was my line with Satanism.
1980s.
So, but he's trying to make the case that actually ritual sacrifice, it's not, those two words don't mean that.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
Or he's saying they shouldn't do that. It's not that they don't do it now.
Well, yeah,
He
but,
says that it shouldn't, that should not be the trigger, that should not be the connotation, the
Focus.
connection that immediately happens in our psyche. It shouldn't be.
He said that's.
He's trying to, he's.
no, he's saying,
The exception of absolute.
I mean, you can say that, don't think that.
Yeah.
But that's all I have. I have years and years and a whole lifetime of experience. And that's what that word is. No, I'm just saying. So, I bring all that, right? So I was just, before we came in, I was talking to somebody at the table. If, having been Orthodox for 20 years, I can read this book, and because of my experience in listening to the language of the liturgy, and I can hear it, and I can say, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Because there's so much of these other kinds of language, whereas, but still, there's still that meaning that the word comes with, so it's just hard to not think of it that way.
And in the book, when it was talking about how the Greeks, if any at all, they didn't have human sacrifice, but they had it on their jars.
Yes.
They had payment on their.
Oh,
And,
yes.
and, you know, it's the same thing, you know, in modern society right now. You see all this representation and glorification in Hollywood movies and you know, it doesn't happen today. Might in some places, but it doesn't happen today. But people are still fascinated by the wrong definition of this sacrifice.
Well, and it's exactly the part of the sacrifice that he says was not a big deal in the ancient world, meaning it's the ritual violence, which was not what they focused on. The actual killings, when I think of, you know, Satanism, like you brought up, you know, it's the whole stuff, the knife and all that stuff, and the candles. And I was just thinking there's a line that I think is what you were getting at. It says on page 6, the metaphor of sacrifice was a meaningful and effective way to preach the gospel in the ancient world. And of course, it changed to what you're saying is it's hard for us to hear that word and not picture. And I realize I certainly fall into that because I've thought of the sacrifice of Christ as definitely focusing on a crucifix kind of view.
Well, and you think about, what you hear, I think most of us converted from either Protestantism or Roman Catholicism, and that's our perspective. I mean, the wrath of God was poured out onto Christ on the cross, and it is aimed at that point, the point of death. That's the story.
When you can see it in Ignatian spiritual exercises where you're meant to use your imagination to meditate upon the suffering, to feel the full weight, to consider that Christ is suffering in that way every time we sin, that kind of, it's focused on the violence,
Yeah.
for sure.
Also, there's also what's really seen today. You see a lot of people. It's the selfishness. You know, when I it just struck me right now. A lot of people are sacrificing other people and other people's health and other people's choices and do it for themselves. Like, for instance, you know, a mother sacrificing her child's life for, you know, for comfort. Like, I'd rather not be responsible. Or there are some leaders out there like, this is for the greater good. I'll pick the lesser of two evils. Sacrifices like those for.
Well, every single one of us in this room are doing that, have done it, right? I mean, all of us here have one of these. Like, think about what it took to get the materials to make this thing, and their children doing that, you know what I mean? Or these clothes that we wear, shoes that we have on, like, yeah, we all are willing to sacrifice others to, you know, for our own comfort. Even if we don't do it directly. It's kind of wild to think about.
Well, and I wonder if that's where, I feel like we're oscillating between those two valencies of this order between them.
Yeah.
Because then I was thinking about this other line, it's early on where he says, you know, why is it that God chooses sacrifice as and if we're thinking of sacrifice in the way you're suggesting, that the connotation that is accrued on that word, it does seem more bizarre than maybe it seemed as a metaphor to the first century hearers.
So I have two questions that I've been wrestling with ever since I started reading this book. And we don't have to answer them tonight, but I would like someday to get an answer.
Throw them out there.
One of them is, so the crucifixion, so the crucifixion of Christ, if it's not the substitutionary judgment of God thing that I was raised with, the penal thing, then am I to look at it as God's, it does say, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, so is Christ on the cross God's gift to me? And what the heck does that mean? So that's one question I've been wrestling with. The other question I've been wrestling with is if sacrifice as gift or honor or reverence or whatever we call it was so much a part of the ancient world that all the ancients were doing. Oops, I think she bit her lip or tongue.
Probably.
There's food.
What makes the Judeo-Christian sacrifice qualitatively different than what was going on? In other words, one could argue like, oh, well, the Jews just, they just did the same thing everybody else was doing, and so is the difference, the qualitative difference, not so much the act of the sacrifice itself, but to whom the sacrifice was? I'm trying to unpack that in my head.
Yeah.
So those are my two questions I've been wrestling with that I'm not real sure I don't have an
Yeah,
answer.
I think as we move through, I think both of those questions will become a little bit more clear.
Okay.
But keep bringing them up, because I think it's good. I think those are really good questions, and I think we all do well to kind of, as we're chewing on things, to think through that. Oh, John, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, yeah, I remember, I was watching a Russian movie about Prince of Vladimir, and he was in Kiev, of course, and they had the worship there, and then he conquered Kiev, and so they had to change God. And so they threw down the temple of one God, and then somebody says, well, let's bring up this God, and they said, well, don't you know that requires human sacrifice? And so each god that they threw down or brought up had a different ritual, but had some sort of sacrifice. So back then there was kind of this trade-off between the two words, like sacrifice as in human sacrifice, like blood, or a sacrifice of fruit and your time and all that sort of stuff. When I saw the movie, I go, I never thought about that. You throw down one god, bring up another. Now the whole thing changed.
See, if we go back to that old usage of sacrifice, and we were, it's kind of obviously going toward the sacrifice of Christ. The food thing was the first thing that jumped into our mind, but it makes so much more sense that sacrifice would be connected with something like the Eucharist.
Yeah.
Which is odd. And I never would have thought of that as a Protestant.
In the Old Testament, if they sacrificed food and incense, and we still have incense in our church today, is it offered to God? Because it always looks like it's offered to the saints, to me, and I don't really understand.
The prayer for incense, but the priest says a silent prayer for incense, and it's a prayer to God, it's an offering to God. Incense we offer thee, is the line, or one of the lines that we say before offering of incense, when we're sensing gifts specifically. So it is offered to God, in a sense.
Incense?
I picked up on that too immediately after I said it. All right, so we're at, I think we covered most of the stuff in these discussion questions. I think it was a good discussion. So I will, if I don't have your email, get it to me, and I'll include you. I'll send out discussion questions. I think chapter 3 is pretty long and I think it's kind of detailed. And so if I think it's enough to kind of go on next week, but if I read through it again and feel like there's not enough material there, I may email you out and say, read chapter 4 too, but I don't think I'll do that until the following week, and then we'll do 2 at a time.
Okay.
Okay, anything else, anybody? Alright. It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure in the name of our God, more honorable than cherubim, more glorious beyond contrast than seraphim. Thou who without corruption givest forth the God of the word, true Theotokos, we magnify thee. Amen.
Thank you for, I appreciate that. Thank you. We'll see.
Oh, good. That was one of those things that when I was, I love